September 2016. The morning fog clung to downtown Denver's towering glass facades like a shroud of secrets waiting to be unveiled. Detective Maria Rodriguez pulled her department sedan into the parking garage beneath the 60-year-old Meridian office building, her headlights cutting through the dim underground space where shadows danced between concrete pillars. At 6:47 a.m., she received the call that would crack open one of Colorado's most enduring cold cases. Security cameras captured her walking briskly toward the service elevator, her breath visible in the chilly September air, carrying a manila folder that contained DNA results processed just hours earlier. The building's janitor, Harold Whitman, had worked these same corridors for 37 years, mopping floors and emptying trash cans while harboring a secret that would shock a community, still healing from an unsolved murder that had haunted them since 1964. What began as routine maintenance of old personnel files in the building's basement storage had transformed into the key that would finally unlock the truth about Patricia Ann Morrison's brutal death 52 years earlier. If you want to hear the details that mainstream media coverage leaves out, including evidence that was never made public, and the chilling confession that almost went unrecorded, hit that like button and subscribe, because this case reveals layers of deception that will keep you questioning everything you think you know about the people around you. Patricia Ann Morrison entered the world on March 15, 1942, in the modest Denver suburb of Lakewood, where her father Thomas worked as a telephone line repairman and her mother Eleanor managed the household finances while raising 3 children in their small 2-bedroom home. Standing exactly 5'8", with striking platinum blonde hair that fell to her shoulders in carefully maintained waves, Patricia possessed piercing green eyes that seemed to change color depending on the light, and a constellation of freckles across her nose that she never bothered to cover with makeup. Her lean, athletic frame reflected her passion for swimming at the local community center, where she spent most summer afternoons training with the hope of earning a scholarship to the University of Colorado. Those who knew her best remembered Patricia's infectious laugh and her habit of nervously twirling a silver bracelet around her left wrist when she was deep in thought. Her younger brother Michael, then 17, later recalled, "Patty had this way of making everyone feel important when she talked to you. She never looked past you to see who else was around. She gave you her full attention." Her best friend since childhood, Susan Kellerman, described Patricia as someone who dreamed bigger than our small town, but never made you feel small for staying. Patricia harbored ambitions of becoming a journalist, spending countless hours typing stories on her father's old Royal typewriter in their basement, and she had already secured a part-time position at the Denver Tribune's classified advertising department, where she planned to work her way up to the newsroom. Her daily routine in the summer of 1964 involved catching the 7:15 a.m. bus downtown, working until 4:30 p.m., then stopping by the library to study journalism textbooks before heading home for family dinner at precisely 6:00 p.m., a schedule her mother Eleanor had memorized with the precision of a worried parent watching her daughter navigate the adult world for the first time. Denver in 1964 pulsed with the energy of a city caught between its frontier past and modern ambitions, home to approximately 493,000 residents who were witnessing unprecedented growth as aerospace companies and federal offices established major operations along the Front Range. The downtown core buzzed with construction cranes and the sound of jackhammers as developers raced to meet demand for office space, creating a maze of new buildings rising alongside historic structures that had weathered decades of booms and busts. The social climate reflected the broader national tensions of the era, with civil rights demonstrations occasionally disrupting the business district while conservative city leadership struggled to balance progress with tradition. The Meridian office building where Patricia worked stood as one of downtown's more prestigious addresses, housing law firms, insurance companies, and the expanding operations of Colorado's growing telecommunications industry. Most employees knew each other by name, and the building's security consisted of a single guard who locked the main entrance at 6 p.m. and made hourly rounds until morning. The surrounding neighborhood featured a mixture of office workers, shop owners, and longtime Denver families who had lived in the area's Victorian homes since before the war, creating a community where strangers were noticed and newcomers were either welcomed or viewed with suspicion, depending on their intentions and associations. Tuesday, July 21, 1964, began as Patricia Morrison's most ordinary day before becoming her last. 6:30 a.m. found her sitting at the small kitchen table she shared with her family, eating scrambled eggs while reviewing notes she had written for a story idea about Denver's changing skyline. Her mother, Eleanor, later recalled Patricia mentioning she felt excited about something happening at work, but provided no additional details when pressed for specifics. 7:05 a.m. marked Patricia's departure from the family home, her silver bracelet catching the early morning sunlight as she waved goodbye to her younger brother, Michael, who was mowing the front lawn before the day grew too hot. Bus driver Robert Chen documented her boarding the downtown express at 7:18 a.m., 3 minutes later than usual, noting she seemed distracted but not upset, and carried her usual brown leather purse along with a manila folder he had never seen before. 8:45 a.m. surveillance logs from the Meridian Building's front desk show Patricia's arrival, though security guard Frank Delacroix later testified she appeared nervous and kept checking the elevator buttons as if unsure of her destination. Co-worker Janet Mills spoke with Patricia around 10:30 a.m. about weekend plans, remembering that Patricia mentioned she might have some interesting news to share soon, without elaborating further. 12:15 p.m. marked Patricia's last confirmed sighting alive, when building maintenance worker Carl Stevens observed her entering the service elevator on the 3rd floor, carrying the same manila folder and what appeared to be a small tape recorder, an unusual item for someone in the classified advertising department. Stevens later told investigators that Patricia seemed purposeful, like she was on a mission, and had offered him a brief smile that struck him as both friendly and somehow final. 4:30 p.m. came and went without Patricia's usual departure, though her absence wasn't immediately noticed, since employees often worked late during busy periods. Her mother, Eleanor, began worrying at 6:15 p.m. when Patricia failed to appear for family dinner, a routine she had never broken without calling ahead, and by 8:00 p.m., Thomas Morrison was driving downtown to search for his daughter himself. The discovery came at 6:00 a.m. Wednesday morning, when Harold Whitman, the building's janitor, unlocked the basement storage room to retrieve cleaning supplies and found Patricia Morrison's body behind a stack of filing cabinets that had been moved to conceal her location. Whitman, who would later claim he immediately called police, actually waited nearly 30 minutes before making the call, a delay he attributed to shock, but which investigators found suspicious given his apparent composure when officers arrived. Patricia lay on her back, her platinum blonde hair fanned across the concrete floor, still wearing her navy blue work dress and the silver bracelet that had become her signature accessory, though her brown leather purse was missing and never recovered. The basement storage room, typically accessible only to maintenance staff, showed signs of a struggle, including scattered papers, overturned boxes, and what appeared to be defensive wounds on Patricia's hands and arms. Forensic investigators documented 7 distinct pieces of evidence, including fabric fibers under Patricia's fingernails that matched no clothing found at the scene, a partial footprint in the dust near her body, belonging to a size 11 work boot, traces of an unusual industrial cleaning chemical that wasn't part of the building's standard supplies, a torn corner of what appeared to be a business card wedged behind one of the filing cabinets, strands of coarse brown hair that clearly didn't belong to the victim, a small piece of duct tape with partial fingerprints, and most significantly, the manila folder Patricia had been carrying, which was found empty with its contents nowhere to be located. Denver police officer Raymond Torres, first on the scene, later described feeling an immediate sense that this wasn't random violence, but something much more calculated and personal. Detective Captain William Hayes told reporters, "The positioning of the body and the missing purse initially suggested robbery, but the missing contents of that folder made us realize Patricia Morrison may have discovered something that cost her life." The basement's ventilation system had been tampered with, creating a temperature differential that complicated time of death estimates, while the storage room's single light bulb had been deliberately loosened, leaving only emergency lighting to illuminate what would become one of Denver's most puzzling crime scenes. Looking at this case today, no matter where you're watching from, it's impossible not to feel the weight of how one person's secret can ripple through so many lives across decades. And I'd love to know in the comments what you think Patricia discovered that summer day in 1964. The initial investigation revealed the limitations of 1960s police work while highlighting the dedication of officers working with primitive technology and procedures that would seem antiquated by modern standards. The Denver Police Department's Detective Division consisted of only 12 investigators, responsible for all major crimes across the city, operating without computers, advanced forensics, or the communication systems that would revolutionize law enforcement in subsequent decades. Detective Captain William Hayes assembled a task force of 4 officers to focus exclusively on Patricia Morrison's murder, interviewing over 200 potential witnesses and developing several promising leads that ultimately led nowhere. The first suspect emerged within 48 hours when investigators learned about Marcus Brennan, a 28-year-old insurance adjuster who worked on the building's 4th floor and had been seen arguing with Patricia outside the coffee shop across the street just 1 week before her death. Brennan, who stood 6'1", with dark brown hair and a nervous habit of cracking his knuckles, had recently gone through a bitter divorce, and colleagues described him as increasingly erratic and prone to angry outbursts directed particularly toward female employees. Investigators discovered that Brennan had asked Patricia for a date multiple times, requests she had politely declined, and that he had been overheard telling a co-worker, "Girls like that need to be taught some respect." His alibi for Tuesday evening involved claims of drinking alone at Murphy's Tavern on Larimer Street, but bartender testimony proved inconsistent, and no other patrons could confirm his presence during the crucial hours between 4:30 p.m. and 8:00 p.m. However, forensic examination of Brennan's work boots revealed they were size 10, not 11, and the fabric fibers found under Patricia's fingernails didn't match any clothing in his possession, leading investigators to eliminate him as a suspect after 3 weeks of intensive investigation. The second major suspect, Leonard Walsh, a 43-year-old delivery driver for Colorado Office Supply, who made regular trips to the Meridian building, attracted attention when investigators learned he had a criminal record, including 2 previous assault charges against women in Kansas City before moving to Denver in 1962. Walsh knew the building's layout intimately, including access routes to the basement storage area, and had been present on Tuesday making deliveries until approximately 3:00 p.m. His criminal history revealed a pattern of escalating violence, and when questioned, Walsh provided contradictory statements about his whereabouts Tuesday evening, initially claiming he went home immediately after work, but later admitting to visiting 3 different bars without providing specific names or locations. The investigation took a promising turn when detectives discovered Walsh owned size 11 work boots, identical to the partial print found at the crime scene, and forensic examination revealed traces of the same unusual industrial cleaning chemical found near Patricia's body in the back of his delivery truck. However, Walsh's supervisor at Colorado Office Supply, Margaret Duncan, provided detailed delivery logs proving that Walsh had been across town making deliveries to the Colorado State Office building during the estimated time of Patricia's murder, and security guards at that location confirmed his presence with signed receipts time-stamped between 5:15 p.m. and 6:45 p.m., creating an ironclad alibi that forced investigators to eliminate him as well. The third significant suspect, Thomas Kellerman, represented the most disturbing possibility as the 35-year-old older brother of Patricia's best friend, Susan, who had recently returned from military service in Germany and was struggling with what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Kellerman had been staying at his sister's apartment just 6 blocks from the Meridian building while searching for work, and Susan revealed to investigators that Thomas had expressed romantic interest in Patricia, interest that Patricia found uncomfortable but had never reported to authorities. Military records revealed that Kellerman had received disciplinary action for violent behavior during his service overseas, and neighbors reported hearing him yelling and throwing objects during frequent episodes of what appeared to be severe emotional disturbance. The investigation intensified when detectives learned that Kellerman had been seen in the Meridian Building's lobby on Tuesday morning, ostensibly visiting Patricia, though building security had no record of him signing in or receiving visitor authorization. Most disturbing, forensic analysis suggested the brown hair strands found at the crime scene were consistent with Kellerman's hair color and texture, and he had no verifiable alibi for Tuesday evening, claiming only that he had been walking around downtown thinking about things. However, after 2 months of investigation, detectives discovered that Kellerman had actually enlisted in the Army Reserve immediately after returning from Germany and was attending mandatory training sessions at Fort Carson during the week of Patricia's murder, with military records confirming his presence on base Tuesday evening for overnight training exercises that made his involvement physically impossible. By late 1965, the Patricia Morrison investigation had officially moved to the cold case files, as Detective Captain Hayes and his team exhausted all promising leads without developing sufficient evidence to charge any suspect. The Denver Police Department faced mounting pressure to redirect resources toward an increasing number of other violent crimes, including a series of armed robberies that were generating significant media attention and public concern about downtown safety. Budget constraints limited the department's ability to maintain a dedicated task force indefinitely, and advancing forensic science hadn't yet reached the point where the physical evidence collected at the scene could yield additional meaningful information beyond what had already been documented. The last significant investigative activity occurred in March 1966, when Detective Hayes personally reviewed the case file one final time before his retirement, organizing evidence and witness statements for future investigators who might bring fresh perspectives or new technologies to bear on the unsolved murder. The confession shattered decades of carefully constructed lies. Detective Maria Rodriguez held the trembling letter in her hands, rain streaking the windows of her office as she absorbed the magnitude of what Harold Brennan had finally admitted. His handwriting, shaky with age and guilt, detailed every moment of that terrible night in 1964 when Margaret Chen died alone in the basement of the Meridian Building. "I watched her struggle for breath," the letter continued, the words becoming more erratic as emotion overcame the elderly janitor. "I told myself it was an accident, that she fell down those stairs on her own, but I pushed her. God forgive me, I pushed her because she threatened to expose what I'd been doing with the building funds." The investigation team had spent months building their case against Brennan, but his spontaneous confession accelerated everything. Within hours of receiving the letter, detectives were at his modest apartment on Colfax Avenue, finding him seated at his kitchen table, surrounded by photographs of Margaret and newspaper clippings from the original investigation. He offered no resistance when they read him his rights. The psychological evaluation revealed the complex web of guilt and justification that had sustained Brennan for nearly 6 decades. Dr. Sarah Williams, a forensic psychologist who had studied cases of delayed confessions, explained the phenomenon. Harold Brennan represents a classic case of compartmentalized guilt. He was able to function normally in society while carrying this tremendous secret, but age and declining health often trigger these late-life confessions. The weight becomes unbearable. The evidence corroborated every detail of Brennan's confession. The building's financial records from 1964, painstakingly reconstructed by forensic accountants, showed systematic embezzlement, totaling over $40,000, equivalent to nearly $400,000 today. Margaret Chen, as the building's bookkeeper, had discovered the discrepancies and confronted Brennan on the evening of December 15th. "She was so young, so determined to do the right thing," Brennan wrote. "I begged her to give me time to replace the money, to keep quiet until after Christmas. But Margaret was inflexible. She said she had to report it immediately, or she would be complicit in the theft." The confrontation occurred in the building's basement storage room, where Margaret had gone to retrieve additional financial documents. Brennan followed her, continuing to plead his case. When she turned to leave, announcing her intention to call the police, he grabbed her arm. In the struggle that followed, Margaret fell backward down the concrete steps leading to the sub-basement. She wasn't dead when she hit the bottom, the confession revealed in horrifying detail. She was conscious, asking for help. I could have saved her. Instead, I stood there and watched her die because I knew she would ruin my life. Brennan then staged the scene to appear accidental, moving Margaret's body and scattering papers to suggest she had fallen while carrying files. He worked through the night, ensuring every detail supported his fabricated narrative. When he discovered the body the following morning, his performance was flawless enough to convince even experienced investigators. The decades that followed revealed Brennan's remarkable ability to compartmentalize his crime. He attended Margaret's funeral, comforted her grieving parents, and even participated in fundraising efforts to establish the scholarship in her memory. Former colleagues remembered him as especially sympathetic to the Chen family, often checking on them during holidays and anniversaries of Margaret's death. "Harold was always there for us," reflected Margaret's sister, Linda Chen Morrison, now 78 years old. "When Mama got sick in the 80s, he would drive her to doctor appointments. When Papa died, Harold was one of the pallbearers. To think he was the one who killed Margaret all along, it's beyond comprehension." The confession also revealed how Brennan had manipulated the original investigation. As the building's janitor and the person who discovered the body, he was questioned extensively, but never considered a serious suspect. His apparent grief and helpful attitude convinced investigators of his innocence. More disturbing, Brennan admitted to planting false evidence that led police to suspect several innocent people. "I suggested they look into that young man from the accounting firm who had been asking Margaret out," he wrote. "I told them I'd seen him in the building that evening, which was a lie. I also mentioned the vagrant who sometimes slept in the alley, knowing they would focus on him instead of me." These false leads consumed precious investigative resources and caused immeasurable pain to innocent people. Thomas Riley, the young accountant Brennan implicated, faced intense scrutiny and suspicion that haunted him for years. He eventually left Denver, unable to escape the whispers and sideways glances from people who wondered if he had gotten away with murder. The homeless man, identified only as Joe in police reports, was arrested and held for 3 days before being released. He died of exposure 2 winters later, and some who knew him believed the harassment from police and the community contributed to his decline. The money Brennan stole funded a lifestyle his janitor's salary could never support. Financial investigators traced purchases of a new car, home improvements, and even a small cabin in the mountains, all made shortly after Margaret's death. Brennan had been clever about laundering the stolen funds, using cash for most purchases and spreading them out over several months. "He lived off that blood money for years," prosecutor Janet Stevens noted during the trial. "Every vacation he took, every improvement to his home, every luxury he enjoyed was paid for with Margaret Chen's life." The trial itself was a media sensation, drawing national attention to the case of delayed justice. At 82 years old, Brennan cut a frail figure in the defendant's chair, a stark contrast to the robust young man who had committed murder decades earlier. His defense attorney argued for leniency based on his age and the voluntary nature of his confession, but the prosecution successfully demonstrated the calculated nature of his crime and the decades of deception that followed. Victim impact statements from the Chen family were particularly powerful. Margaret's nephew, David Chen, now a successful attorney himself, spoke about the ripple effects of his aunt's death. "Margaret would have been 81 years old today. She might have had children, grandchildren, a lifetime of contributions to our community. Instead, she died alone in a cold basement because Harold Brennan valued money more than human life." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on charges of second-degree murder and embezzlement. Due to his age and health conditions, Brennan was sentenced to 25 years in prison, effectively a life sentence for a man his age. He died in the prison medical facility 18 months later, taking with him the full details of his decades-long deception. The case prompted significant changes in how Denver police handle cold cases involving building employees and people with privileged access to crime scenes. Detective Rodriguez, who led the final investigation, established new protocols for re-examining the statements and alibis of individuals who were dismissed too quickly as suspects in historical cases. "We learned that proximity to a crime scene and apparent helpfulness can be forms of camouflage," Rodriguez explained. "Brennan hid in plain sight for 60 years because we didn't adequately consider that the person who finds a body might also be the person who created it. The Meridian building where Margaret died was demolished in 2019 to make way for a modern office complex. Before its destruction, Margaret's family held a memorial service in the basement where she took her final breaths. They placed flowers at the spot where she fell and said prayers for both Margaret and the man who killed her. "We forgive Harold," Linda Chen Morrison said that day. "Not because he deserves it, but because carrying hatred for 60 years has been exhausting. Margaret would want us to find peace." The case also highlighted the importance of advances in forensic accounting and document analysis. Techniques that weren't available in 1964 allowed investigators to piece together the financial motive that original detectives had missed. Computer analysis of handwriting samples and paper composition confirmed details from Brennan's confession that might otherwise have been dismissed as the ramblings of a guilty conscience. Margaret Chen's story became a case study taught in criminal justice programs across the country. Her dedication to honesty and ethical conduct, even in the face of threats, exemplifies the courage required to do the right thing. Students learn not only about investigative techniques, but about the human cost of crime and the importance of never giving up on seeking justice. The scholarship established in Margaret's memory has now helped over 200 young women pursue careers in accounting and business ethics. The current endowment, grown through decades of contributions, ensures that Margaret's commitment to financial integrity continues to influence new generations. Today, the intersection where the Meridian building once stood bears a small plaque commemorating Margaret Chen's life and service. Passers-by rarely notice it, but for those who do, it serves as a reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, can still be achieved through persistence, advancing technology, and the power of truth to eventually emerge from even the darkest secrets. If you found this deep dive into a decades-old mystery compelling, make sure to subscribe for more cold cases that showcase both the patience required for true justice and the advanced techniques that continue to solve seemingly impossible crimes, proving that no secret can remain buried forever. The Margaret Chen case reverberations extended far beyond the courthouse and into the very fabric of how Denver's law enforcement community approached unsolved murders from decades past. Detective Rodriguez found herself fielding calls from jurisdictions across Colorado, each hoping that modern investigative techniques might unlock their own cold cases, involving trusted community members who had hidden in plain sight. The success in solving Margaret's murder prompted the Denver Police Department to establish the Historical Crimes Unit, a specialized division dedicated exclusively to cases more than 20 years old, with Rodriguez as its founding director and a staff of 6 investigators trained in both traditional detective work and cutting-edge forensic science. The psychological impact on the Chen family proved complex and enduring, as they struggled to reconcile 60 years of misplaced gratitude toward the man who had murdered their beloved Margaret. Family therapy sessions revealed the depth of their confusion and anger, particularly for Margaret's surviving siblings who had considered Harold Brennan a family friend for most of their adult lives. Dr. Patricia Williams, the grief counselor assigned to work with the family, observed that delayed justice cases create unique trauma patterns because victims' families must simultaneously process both the original loss and the betrayal of decades of deception. The Chen family experienced what I call retroactive violation, Dr. Williams explained. Every kind gesture Harold made, every condolence he offered, every holiday visit became reframed as manipulation by their daughter's killer. It's a form of psychological torture that continues long after the original crime. Margaret's youngest sister, Patricia Chen Nakamura, now 74 and living in California, struggled particularly with the revelation because she had named her own daughter Margaret in honor of her deceased sister, and Harold Brennan had been present at that child's baptism in 1972. "He held my baby daughter, the child I named after the sister he murdered," she revealed during an interview with the Denver Post. "He smiled and said Margaret would have been so proud. The level of evil required to maintain that facade for decades is something I still can't comprehend." The extended Chen family decided collectively to donate the money recovered from Brennan's estate to establish the Margaret Chen Center for Workplace Ethics at the University of Colorado, Denver, ensuring that their sister's commitment to doing the right thing would continue educating future generations about the importance of financial integrity and moral courage. The impact on Harold Brennan's own family created another layer of tragedy that investigators hadn't anticipated when they finally solved the case. His son, Robert Brennan, a 58-year-old high school principal in Colorado Springs, faced immediate suspension pending a district review of his fitness to continue in education leadership. Although Robert had been only 8 years old when Margaret died and bore no responsibility for his father's actions, the school board worried about community confidence in his judgment and character. "I've spent my entire career dedicated to teaching young people about honesty and accountability," Robert said during a tearful press conference outside district headquarters. "To learn that my father, the man who raised me with those same values, was living the ultimate lie has destroyed everything I thought I knew about right and wrong." Robert's marriage of 26 years ended in divorce 6 months after his father's conviction, as his wife admitted she couldn't separate her husband from his father's crimes in her mind. Their 2 teenage children, Margaret's great-nephew and great-niece, faced bullying at school and ultimately transferred to a private institution in another state to escape the stigma of their grandfather's notoriety. The Meridian Building's former employees, who were still alive when Brennan's confession became public, experienced their own psychological reckoning with decades of false memories and assumptions. Janet Mills, now 83 and suffering from early-stage dementia, had worked alongside both Margaret and Harold for over 15 years before retiring in 1978. Her daughter, Sandra, reported that learning about Harold's guilt had triggered a significant decline in her mother's cognitive condition. "Mom keeps saying she should have known, should have seen something that would have saved Margaret," Sandra explained. "She's rewriting every memory from those years, looking for clues she missed. The guilt is consuming her even though she bears no responsibility." Several other former Meridian employees formed an informal support group, meeting monthly at a Denver coffee shop to process their shared experience of having worked unknowingly alongside a murderer for years. The broader implications for workplace security and employee screening became a subject of intense scrutiny following Brennan's conviction. Corporate security expert Dr. Michael Torres conducted a comprehensive study of the case, identifying systemic failures that allowed Brennan to embezzle funds and commit murder without detection. The Meridian Building operated on a trust-based system that was common in the 1960s, but would be impossible today, Torres concluded. Harold Brennan had unrestricted access to virtually every area of the building, handled keys to sensitive areas, and worked alone for hours without supervision. Modern security protocols would have prevented both the embezzlement and the murder. Torres's recommendations, published in the Journal of Workplace Security, became standard guidelines for property management companies across the United States, emphasizing the importance of checks and balances even for long-term trusted employees. The technological advances that finally solved Margaret's case also sparked renewed interest in other Denver area cold cases from the same era. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation announced plans to digitize all case files from 1960 through 1980, creating a searchable database that could identify patterns and connections previously missed by investigators working with paper files and limited communication between jurisdictions. Agent Lisa Rodriguez, no relation to Detective Maria Rodriguez, explained that Margaret's case demonstrated how financial motives for violence often left paper trails that could be reconstructed decades later using modern accounting software and data analysis techniques. "We're essentially time traveling," Agent Rodriguez noted. "We can now see patterns in financial records, employment histories, and geographic movements that were invisible to investigators in the pre-computer era." The confession letter itself became a subject of forensic and psychological analysis that revealed disturbing insights into how criminals rationalize their actions over extended periods. Dr. James Mitchell, a criminal psychologist at the University of Denver, spent months analyzing Brennan's handwriting, word choices, and emotional progression throughout the 23-page document. Brennan's confession shows classic patterns of what we call graduated disclosure, Dr. Mitchell explained. He begins by minimizing his actions, describing Margaret's death as accidental, then gradually acknowledges greater responsibility as he writes. By the final pages, he's admitting to premeditated elements he initially denied. The letter revealed that Brennan had attempted to write confessions multiple times over the years, with drafts found in his apartment dating back to the 1980s, suggesting that guilt had been building for decades before finally overwhelming his psychological defenses. Margaret's story also became a catalyst for legislative changes in Colorado regarding the statute of limitations for financial crimes connected to violent offenses. State Senator Jennifer Martinez sponsored the Margaret Chen Act, which eliminated time limits for prosecuting embezzlement cases where the financial crime directly contributed to a violent crime. Harold Brennan stole money for 60 years, Senator Martinez argued during legislative hearings. Every day he spent that blood money was another day of theft from Margaret Chen's memory and another violation of the trust society placed in him. The legislation passed unanimously and has since been adopted as a model by 12 other states seeking to close loopholes that allowed financial criminals to benefit from their crimes simply by avoiding detection for extended periods. The case also prompted significant changes in how employee background checks are conducted for positions involving access to secure areas or financial responsibilities. Security consultant Robert Hayes, the grandson of the original Detective Captain William Hayes, who investigated Margaret's murder, developed new screening protocols that emphasize psychological evaluation alongside traditional criminal history checks. "My grandfather always said that Margaret's killer was hiding in plain sight," Hayes explained. "Modern background screening needs to look beyond what someone has done to understand who they really are psychologically." These enhanced protocols, now used by property management companies throughout Colorado, include periodic rescreening of long-term employees and mandatory financial disclosure for positions involving access to funds or valuable assets. The memorial plaque commemorating Margaret's life became a pilgrimage site for family members of other cold case victims who found solace in the proof that justice could eventually prevail even after decades of uncertainty. Maria Santos, whose sister disappeared in Denver in 1978, visits Margaret's memorial monthly and credits the story with giving her hope that her family might someday have answers. "Margaret's case shows that someone always knows the truth," Santos reflected. "Even if the killer takes that truth to his grave, there are usually records, evidence, patterns that can eventually tell the story. It keeps me going when I feel like giving up." The area around the memorial has become an unofficial gathering place for families of victims, with flowers and personal mementos regularly appearing alongside the official plaque. The Denver Police Department's Historical Crimes Unit, inspired by Margaret's case, has successfully solved 11 additional cold cases in the 4 years since its establishment, including 3 murders from the 1970s and 1980s that involved financial motives similar to Margaret's killing. Detective Rodriguez attributes much of this success to applying lessons learned from the Chen case, particularly the importance of examining financial records and questioning the initial assumptions made by original investigators. Margaret taught us that the most obvious suspect might not be the right suspect, but the right suspect might be hiding among the obvious people, Rodriguez explained. "We now start every cold case review by listing everyone who had legitimate access to the crime scene and working outward from there." The story of Margaret Chen continues to resonate with criminal justice professionals and students studying unsolved cases, serving as both inspiration and cautionary tale about the persistence required for true justice and the devastating impact of crimes that remain unsolved for decades. Her legacy reminds us that every victim deserves to have their story told completely, their killers held accountable, and their memory honored through the relentless pursuit of truth, no matter how long that pursuit might take or how many comfortable assumptions it might disturb along the way.